The Orc Baby. Forget about the elves deciding to wield the rings of power they know Sauron helped create. Forget about the addiction to mithril, or the lunacy of Sauron being overthrown by orcs. The orc baby mama and her husband, who just doesn't want to go to war today, is the single biggest upending of Lord of the Rings that the Rings of Power has dared to do so far. And you know, I have rarely seen the internet unified in quite such a way. Everyone from YouTube influencers to even mainstream media journalists are absolutely slamming this nonsensical and unnecessary violation of Tolkien's world. And whilst of course there are still the occasional stubborn bootlickers, as always, it's kinda heartening to see so many people recognize a simple fact. That moral ambiguity does not actually automatically make everything better. And I know that might be a strange thing to hear from a 40k fan, but as I do so often say, variety is the spice of life. In 40k, you have a world that is crafted quite specifically with the purpose of introducing ambiguity. Chaos is a force of nature. It is not evil, it simply is, and it wishes to continue to exist and grow. A motivation we can find in your average houseplant. And humanity that declares chaos to be evil does so, of course, from atop a mountain of Xenos bones as it conquers the galaxy. Even as the fallen Eldar look up at the humans and whine about how their birthright has been stolen by the monkey. All whilst the ever-hungry hippos of the Tyranids hive fleet lick their lips and wrestle with green fungus men that just love to fight. Everybody's got their reason for doing what they're doing, and that is awesome. But equally awesome on occasion is a story of good and evil, where shining heroes are fighting against the eternal hordes of darkness. A world in which good and evil are not relative terms, but rather quite fixed. At least in the grand scheme of things. Sauron is evil. His rings are evil. His creations and creatures are evil. And through that evil they corrupt everything they touch. Thus, for good to survive, it must destroy evil. Simple, compelling, and straightforward. Especially as probably the single most stridently hammered home point of Tolkien's work is that you cannot use evil for good. And any attempt to do so by using the One Ring against Sauron is a doomed attempt, utter folly, that will inevitably end with the corruption of the individual in question. A point pounded home yet further by the creation of the Rings of Power TV show. But jokes aside, I might, in many cases, applaud the decision to give more depth to the things that go bump in the night. One of the few good things I had to say about Andor, for example, was how it showed us the behind the scenes of Imperial intelligence. That was really cool. And giving families a societal structure and a civilization of their own to the evil creatures, to the monsters, well, that could be very interesting. How do the monsters live? How do they feed themselves? How do they police themselves? How do they find connections with one another? But all things have their place, you see, and the place for this is not in Tolkien. The orcs are the foot soldiers of evil. They are the anti-civilizational force, the outsider, the monster in the darkness. And to try to make the audience feel sympathy for these things is not merely counter to their entire reason of being, but obviously also deeply damaging to the fabric of the setting. Because if the orcs truly don't want to go to war today, and are simply happy to live their lives in blissful isolation in Mordor, then what really are they but ugly-ass humans? What right does elves or men have to wage war against them? Why should we root for the men or elves and not for the orcs? Hell, in the current story of the Rings of Power, the greatest villains by far are the elves. They are the ones that created the technology to forge the rings in the first place. It was Galadriel that argued for the rings' creation, and the elves enthusiastically wielded them to save themselves despite knowing they were made with the knowledge of the great enemy. It was the elves' desire for mithril that made the dwarves dig too deep and too greedily when the dwarven king had forbidden the further exploration into mithril. And now, despite knowing that the orcs are not under Sauron's control, and that if anything, they are the ones most likely to be affected by his incompetent, blundering schemes, I mean, Galadriel even says it. Sauron does not need armies, he needs rings. They should be planning an offensive to take Celebrimbor into custody and place him under constant surveillance and destroy his forge. And yet, what are they planning? A genocidal campaign against the orcs. You've got to give it to the showrunners. I don't think anyone could ever have predicted that we would get a Tolkien TV series where the good guys are actually the bad guys. Consider my expectations adequately subverted, I do suppose. But, of course, this progressive obsession with turning villains into heroes and heroes into villains, well, it doesn't work out very well for the actual show itself. Now that the elves are no longer millennia-old wise men, who in essence are able to dictate morality by being on the side of good versus evil, all we're left with is a universe occupied by varying degrees of morons. I mean, hell, honestly, the orcs have unironically done more to defeat Sauron than the elves have. And I wish I was joking, but they have. When Sauron, after Morgoth's defeat, rose up and said, "You are my slaves now. Together we will go and conquer the world," the orcs stabbed him. What did the elves do? When Sauron came to the elves and went, "Hey, should we start making some cool-ass rings?" they went, "Oh yeah, brother, let's do just that. I've been dying to make some rings of power, actually." And when Galadriel finds out that he is Sauron, through no great deductive reasoning of her own or achievement, but rather sheer undiluted accident, she then decides to make the rings anyway, knowing full well that this is something Sauron wanted, and then not inform the creator of these rings that Sauron had a hand in it, and to look out for Sauron in disguise, which Galadriel now know what looks like. As it really is so much worse than you could possibly imagine. It isn't just the showrunners of Rings of Power are asking you to have sympathy with the orcs, they're asking you to realize that the orcs were the real heroes all along. The elves are the ones who are going to get Sauron back into power. Oh heavens. Literally, without the elves' involvement, Sauron would simply just die in a ditch somewhere. Unloved and unremembered and with no power whatsoever. And you know what? In the hands of better scriptwriters, this too could be interesting. Having Sauron, through his deep and cunning machinations, make the elves construct his power base for him, oh, that could be very cool. But characters are only ever as clever as their writers, and the showrunners and creators of the Rings of Power have demonstrated again and again that they possess the average intelligence of a field mouse, after it's been caught in the threshing machine. And so we are left not with the world of Tolkien, but with that of the Rings of Power, in which the elves are not sagacious creatures of light with the wisdom of millennia, but pointy-eared idiots willing to selfishly risk destroying it all for their own gains. A world in which there are no monsters in the dark, hungering for man-flesh roasted over the dying embers of civilization, but instead average-looking British families seeking to eke out a living, free from the oppression of Keir Starmer. A world in which the aforementioned Dark Lord's plots succeed not through planning, guile, or intelligence beyond human comprehension, but the eminently comprehensible powers of poor writing, where plans come to fruition through the bludgeoning force of the script, far so more than a subtle subterfuge. We are, in other words, left not with a world of high fantasy, but merely the bedraggled corpse of Middle-earth, populated by Californian actors, too ass for primetime television, and writers whose greatest achievement, one that even Sauron would no doubt nod approvingly of, was tricking a boardroom full of Amazon executives to cut them a blank check. That last deception, if nothing else, is at least worthy of Mordor. It's just tragic that they didn't use their own lived experiences to channel that evil power into their plot, as, at least, if the screenwriters had written themselves as the orcs, they would have possessed a degree of malice hitherto unknown. Oh well. Not like anyone was expecting anything from the Rings of Power at this point. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.